Okay everyone, finishing up Fear and Loathing, or at least going to try to, on the campaign trail. It's almost like I am on the campaign trail because I'm doing this, testing out some equipment in Salt Lake City Airport. Alright, have it flipped around. I am definitely looking worse for wear. Slept for a couple hours on the airport floor. Not such a great traveler. Whew. But we got our Fear and Loathing, and let's see how much we're going to be able to finish. Look at how I sacrifice for you guys, and I am trying out some of the new wireless equipment, which I thought would be good for traveling. So we ended up at September, and the music in here is really loud. I am sorry. Hopefully this is close enough. And I'm just realizing that all the drawings in here are from that real satirical, some would say vicious, political cartoonist, Ralph Steadman. Okay, September. It starts with a quote from Chief Sitting Bull speaking at the Powder River Conference in 1877. "Hear me, people. We have now to deal with another race, small and feeble when our fathers first met them." Just making sure nobody's think I'm talking to myself, not that I care. "But now great and overbearing. Strangely enough, they have a mind to till the soil, and the love of possession is a disease with them. The Indians also, American Indians, also possess things. I think this is somewhat of a myth of a disjunction. I mean, they fought over their hunting lands. They might not have owned it individually. These people have made many rules that the rich may break, but the poor may not. Ain't that the truth? They take their tithes from the poor and weak to support the rich and those who rule. If the old Sioux chief had ever done these things," what things are they talking about here? Okay, he's saying if Sitting Bull knew the degradation of traveling on Nixon's plane and had the bilious pleasure of dealing with Ron Ziegler, he said, if the old Sioux chief had ever done these things, I think, despite his angry contempt for the white man and everything he stands for, he'd be working overtime for George McGovern today. And Dr. Thompson reflects, "It's a nervous thing to consider, not just 4 more years of Nixon, but Nixon's last 4 years in politics, completely unshackled for the first time in his life from any need to worry about who might or might not vote for him the next time around. There's no point in kidding ourselves with Richard Nixon really wants for America. When he stands at his White House window and looks out on anti-war demonstrators, he doesn't see dissenters, he sees criminals. Dangerous parasites preparing to strike at the heart of the great American system that put him where he is today." And then he quotes something that Bobby Kennedy had said shortly before he was assassinated about Richard Nixon. He said, "Richard Nixon represents an announcement."
With the security directive, all users of the airport are required to wear a face mask over their nose and mouth. Please contact an airport employee if you are in need of a face mask. Thank you for your cooperation.
And I'm not. Richard Nixon, he said, represents the dark side of the American spirit. Now, as it's getting closer to November, both candidates are getting Secret Service detail. So Dr. Thompson says, "I was ready for the standard brand Secret Service bullshit. The only thing that worried me was that maybe some of the SS boys might have seen the current Rolling Stone, which was available that week at newsstands all over Washington. It contained, along with my calm and well-reasoned analysis of the recent GOP convention in Miami, some of the most brutal and hateful caricatures of Richard Nixon ever committed to print in this country or any other. And he says, that crazy bastard Stedman. Nixon has never made any secret of his feelings about the press. Reminds me of Trump. They are still the same gang of biased bastards, fake news, as it were, and cynical sons of bitches that he called them backstage on Election Day in California 10 years ago, when he made his now legendary concession statement after losing the 1962 governor's race to Pat Brown. Then he describes the difference between the two presidential campaign tours. The difference between traveling with McGovern and traveling with Nixon is just about like the difference between going on tour with the Grateful Dead and going on tour with the Pope. And all the reports started coming in as to why McGovern just wasn't performing. It says McGovern was doing better when he was an anti-politician. Seldom has the public perception of a major political figure changed so rapidly. George McGovern's political problem stems not from the belief that he is a dangerous radical and unpatriotic American. His trouble lies in the way people feel about him personally. Many who were attracted to him earlier this year because of his freshness and promise now express strong disillusionment. If George gets stomped in November, it will not be because of anything Richard Nixon did to him. The blame will trace straight back to his brain trust, to whoever had his ear tight enough to convince him that all that bullshit about quote-unquote new politics was fine for the primaries, but it would never work against Nixon. So he would have to abandon his original power base after Miami and swiftly move to consolidate the one he just shattered, the Meany, Daley, Humphrey, Muskie axis, the senile remnants of the Democratic Party's once powerful Roosevelt coalition. And it seemed that way to me. Here's some extensive commentary here at the end of September. The McGovern campaign appears to be fucked at this time. A spectacular come-from-behind win is still possible, on paper and given the right circumstances, but the underlying realities of the campaign itself would seem to preclude this. A cohesive, determined campaign with the same kind of multi-level morale that characterized the McGovern effort in the months preceding the Wisconsin primary might be a good bet to close a 20-point gap on Nixon in the last month of this grim presidential campaign. And then he guessed, and he guessed badly as to how McGovern was going to lose. He says, my guess is that McGovern will lose by a popular vote margin of 5.5%, and probably far worse than the Electoral College, and that was definitely true. And he puts in a footnote. I was somewhat off in this prediction. The final margin was almost 23%. At this point in the campaign, I am no longer functioning with my usual ruthless objectivity. Back in May and June, when my head was clear, I won vast amounts of money with a consistency that baffled the experts. The tragedy of this is that McGovern appeared to have such a sure lock on the White House when the sun came up on Miami Beach on the morning of Thursday, July 13. Snatched defeat from the jaws of victory. Why do I have such trouble with that phrase? Since then, he has crippled himself with a series of almost unbelievable blunders. Eagleton, Salinger, O'Brien, etc. that have understandably convinced huge chunks of the electorate, including at least half of his own hardcore supporters, that the candidate, with first letter caps, is a gibbering dingbat. His behavior since Miami has made a peaceful mockery of everything he seemed to stand for during the primaries. And Dr. Hunter reflects, am I turning into a political junkie? It's not a happy thought, particularly when I see what it's done to all the others. After 2 weeks in Woody Creek, getting back on the press plane was like going back to the cancer ward. Some of the best people in the press corps looked so physically ravaged that it was painful to even see them, much less stand around and make small talk. Many appeared to be in the terminal stages of campaign bloat, a gruesome kind of false fat condition that is said to be connected somehow with failing adrenal glands. The swelling begins within 24 hours of that moment when the victim first begins to suspect that the campaign is essentially meaningless. At that point, the body's entire adrenaline supply is sucked back into the gizzard, and nothing either candidate says, does, or generates will cause it to rise again. And without adrenaline, the flesh begins to swell, the eyes fill with blood and grow smaller in the face. The jowls puff up from the cheekbones, the neck flesh drops, and the body swells up like a frog's throat. The brain fills with noxious waste fluids. The tongue is rubbed raw on the molars. Oof, I know that feeling. And the basic perception antennae begin dying like hairs in a bonfire. I would like to think, or at least claim to think, out of charity, if nothing else, that campaign bloat is at the root of this hellish angst that boils up to obscure my vision every time I try to write anything serious about presidential politics. Grim.